The most notable aspect of Auren is that they have a very cool stronghold. So their stronghold gives you an action space that lets you take 2 steps in a cult of your choice each round, including the round that it's built in. And it also lets you take a favor. And that's pretty cool because usually the only way to get favors is by building temples and sanctuaries. So this is the only stronghold in the game that lets you take a favor. And so like one aspect of this is that between the cult steps that you get from your favor and these 2 cult steps that you can use right away, you can fly up a particular cult in a given round that you're building the stronghold in. And so that makes Auren really fun to play. All right, standard starting placements for Auren are F4 and E9. So, both of these tend to get a lot of power and good spots for neighbors. There tends to be a lot of development around E6, F3 early, so F4 gets a lot of power. Likewise, brown and black like to be in the east, and so you tend to get a lot of power there, and there's really nice town spots. So this east one's really, really sweet if you can dig down through there. If Auren can get up through the middle, that's dreamlike, that's wonderful. But even if they can't get through there in the middle for the town, this is still nice, right? Like you could get E7 and then be like with a bridge, be using G3, or even if you don't get E7, there's also H4 down here to do a sanctuary town with. So, the combination of those features makes these 2 starting placements attractive. The other thing that you'll see from E9, this one in the east, is that this hex C5 is very interesting, right? If you start on temporary shipping, you can single dig that and be reaching A10, C4, C3. So I'll refer to that when we talk about openings, but that's one nice thing about being on E9 is with one shipping, you can single dig C5 and get a bunch of dwellings out. The other version of that is you can, instead of single digging C5, you can actually go to 2 ship round 1, take a priest, and from E9 you can be reaching C4 and then from there A10. And likewise in the south, F4, of course you can build G3, but it also lets you reach I6. So that's the other version of the dwelling rush that these 2 starting placements kind of give you access to. A couple other options for Auren for starting placements. So F4 and C3 is double center. If you think all the upgrading is going to be happening in the middle first, you can do this, and then, for example, with temp shipping, you could be building on C4 and G3 and open temple 2 new dwellings without having to take any power actions from that, so that could be really attractive. And you probably end up heading to E9, soon anyway, but you just sort of start middle and work your way east. Against mermaids will be on D5 almost always, and the risk is that if you're on E9 in the east or on C3, this C4 hex is under major threat because they start with a shipping. So against mermaids, it's F4, C4 usually, and that helps protect basically the east and southeast of the board away from mermaids, and they'll take the northwest and west. So I think that's the way to think about Auren starting placements. F4, E9, occasionally double center, and then versus mermaids, F4, C4. So I think there are 4 sort of common good openings for Auren. I think the safest one in some sense is to do a more normal temple new dwellings opening. And basically the thing we want to address is that the stronghold is really good, right? Their stronghold is good. However, it gives you those 2 steps on a cult of your choice, but you're not really controlling the cults if you're leaving all those spots for priests, like the 3 steps and then even the 2 steps after that. If you're leaving all those open, letting other people get those 3 spots, you're not really dominating the cults with your stronghold. So in some sense, it's sort of safer, easier to play Auren if you're generating priests or have access to priests early and then do your stronghold, for example, round 2 or 3. That lets you play the cults both with priests and the stronghold. So we talked about how if you're double center with Auren with temp shipping, scroll, they can open temple 2 new dwellings without power actions. They could even, be starting on dig scroll and single dig, or just dig down 1 new dwelling and get out of the round quickly. And I'll come back to their favor choices in a moment. The second nice opening for them that I think you should consider is Stronghold New Dwellings, or even in some cases even just Stronghold. And this is especially attractive if you're going to start on the priest scroll or big building scroll. And then, so for example, if you're on big building scroll and then you can take the priest action or something like that. And now you can open Stronghold, you can get a priest to a cult, right? So that issue of not being able to control the cults because you lack priests, if you can remedy that by getting a 3-spot or 2, a good one in the first round, all of a sudden it's kind of okay that you don't have as much priest production out of the gate. So that can be interesting. The next one that I want to mention here is the dwelling rush. So I was referring to that on our starting placements. So this is, for example, that the classic one is starting on temporary shipping and single digging in the east, that gray, and spreading your dwellings out. So that's always good. Just like worker production's like super helpful if it's dwelling round, you're scoring a bunch. The fourth one that I want to mention, I don't see it listed here, is a semi-dwelling rush where you have basically one trading post and dwellings, right? So like you get one new trading post down and 4 new dwellings, and that's how you're going to use your workers round 1. And what's nice about that is your economy is a little more balanced, and also that trading post is now ready to be turned into a stronghold or a temple round 2. And so like, you can open 1 trading post, 4 new dwellings, and then be ready to, stronghold on that round 2 is a nice line. So yeah, I think those are the 4 things that I would mostly consider for beginners. In terms of what favors we should take, and now keep in mind, the stronghold opening also gets us a favor, as does the temple opening. So I think for beginners, I would discourage you taking Water 2. I know Auren are a culty faction, but it's hard for Auren to make the most of their stronghold actions where they get 2 steps on every cult, and having Water 2, another step. It's hard to turn that into a win efficiently. It also can make you very, very slow in every single round. You have so many actions to do. Now, it can work. I just think I would probably discourage beginners from Water 2. I think otherwise, you can feel it out. Any of these 4 favors, I think, depending on the circumstance, could make sense for them. So, the 3 sort of classic economic favors or Earth 1. I think all are fine as long as you're getting yourself going a bit. Okay, so I just want to mention a couple other slightly more advanced things to think about. So I like to just think about Auren going hard on the cults and how to do that in sort of a fun and productive way as possible. And a big part of that is thinking about how do I get the most off of the cult rewards in the first round, maybe first 2 rounds. So couple examples. Let's imagine we want to go for an early cult reward, right? Like let's say it's air digs. For every 4 steps on air, you get a dig, or every 2 steps you get a worker off air. Well, if you start on the priest scroll, right? We were talking how they like the priest. If you start on the priest scroll and notice that they start with an air step, well, you can get that priest to the 3 spot. You could take air 2 with your stronghold, right? If you open stronghold, you could take air 2 with that favor, and then use that 2-step action on the air cult. And we said we're getting our priest to the 3 spot, and we start with an air step. That's actually getting us to the 8th step of air. So you can, with a stronghold opening, taking and getting priest to the 3 spot on air, you can get to the 8th step of air round 1. So that's like a really cool start. If it's water cult rewards round 1, one thing you can do is if you start on the cult step scroll, so this 4 coins and a cult step here, if you start on that scroll, you can actually open stronghold, take some other favor, right? Like something else you like more, say Earth 2, and then still get that water call reward because you're using that scroll step on your water call. You start with a water step, and then your stronghold gives you 2 steps, right? So with water in stronghold opening, you can actually get to the 4th step without needing to take water 2. Likewise, getting, imagine if it's Earth Cult rewards round 1. Well, you don't start with either step on Earth, so maybe we might be discouraged from that. On the other hand, let's imagine we're starting on 4 coins in a cult step. Now we take the priest action, we get that to the 3 spot, so that puts us to the 4th step, counting the scroll. And then we could stronghold for Earth 2 and take our 2-step action on Earth. And actually, we just got to the 8th step on the Earth call. That could be 2 digs, right? So even though they don't look like an Earth, cult faction, with the cult, with the cult step scroll, if they're getting the priest action and putting it to the 3 spot, they can actually get to the 8th step with their stronghold opening. Another example of this would be fire call. Let's think about fire workers round 1. You could start on the cult step scroll, and you could take you could stronghold for fire 1 favor, so the one that gives you coins. You could take your step on fire, and then with your scroll, and then you could use your 2 steps on fire with your stronghold action, and we just got to the 4th step of fire. And we're getting workers off the cult, and we got a favor that gives us coins. So you can see how that has really nice synergy. So I actually think this cult scroll is a little underrated for Auren, because with it, they have a ton of flexibility. And again, we said you'd like to be open in a pretty dominant position on the cults, ideally. The last thing I'll just mention, which I guess I shouldn't because I was discouraging you from opening Water 2, but one nice thing about Water 2 and a temple opening is that you can get to the 4th step of water without needing to put a priest to water. So you could, because you start with a step on water, you take that, you bump on water. So now you're getting to the 4th spot, and if you get a priest, you can even put it to the reward for the next round, for example. You can also, starting on this scroll that I keep talking about, the cult coin scroll, if you start on that, you can actually, with Water 2, be getting to the 8th step, because with a priest to the 3 spots. So you get to the 4th step between the Water 2 and your starting water bump, and then with a priest to the 3 spot plus that scroll bump, now you're getting up to the 8th step on water. So I think Auren are fun. I mean, the way to have fun with Auren is just to make sure that you're being as sort of aggressive and creative as possible, tackling the cult rewards, or just going wild with a dwelling rush. Those are kind of the best ways to have fun with Auren. So Auren, once you get your sort of opening off the ground, you want to, often they'd like to get the 2-key town. So try to be able to close more cults. So if they can town pretty quickly, they're excited to do that. They also tend to get tall quickly. So building early temples and strongholds helps you town early as long as you can get the digs. So, we said they're often on F4. They're often looking to do a sanctuary town somewhere in here. The other town spots for them would be something like that in the north from C4. They have to double dig B5, or E9 going down. The other one that happens sometimes is if you're able to get D5 and C4, you could do a sanctuary town there. That's another possibility. But Auren will often only town twice. They can't fly around quite as well as witches, obviously. And so, can you find that those at least 2 town spots for Auren? You really want to just try to make sure you're making progress towards that and getting keys, right? You want to town fast enough that you can close out the cults that you need to close out. I think those are the main things that you're trying to think about is, can I get 2 of these towns going? Every once in a while, they might be able to play network. with 3 shipping, and then you get I6, dig G1, F2. Can you get C2, A3, D1? That would be the other thing to consider, is if you can expand out that way. Auren are a weaker faction. The lack of internal scoring, and they just have a little bit of a hard time getting going. But I think they're kind of underrated. They're pretty fun. Their stronghold makes them is a really fun tool to try to mess with, because you get those 2 steps and a favor at once. So all of a sudden you can really jump up a particular cult. But they're a little bit on the weak side compared to most factions. So one issue for Auren is that they don't have great ways to score except through their advantage on the cults. So they really want to score on the cults, which means that cultists are really problematic for them as a matchup. You don't want to see cultists in the game. Cultists, even without a ton of cult investment, can take lots of cult points away from Auren. The other one you really don't want to see here is Swarmlings. They'll almost always beat Auren to the 2 key town. They tend to go really hard on cults. And then to a lesser extent, Chaos Magicians can be a bit of a cult faction, but not as much as Swarmlings and Cultists. The other issue with Swarmlings is if they're going to start on G6, that's a bummer, because that then hurts your aspirations for an East town. And they'll start there sometimes. The other thing that you want to look for is gray. Gray can be really problematic for a couple reasons. For one, they'll be often on F6, so that breaks up the East Town possibility. E7's a problem. And what happens is that this G3 hex often gets threatened. So if gray's in and you can see that you can at least beat them to that hex, that keeps the Sanctuary Town possibility here alive. Whereas if gray, for example, if dwarves tunnel to that hex round 1, or if engineers are on temporary shipping and take that round 1, all of a sudden this F4 hex really is stranded. And now you're trying to build out from an E9 hex that already doesn't have any single digs next to it because gray is on F6. So now all of a sudden it gets quite tricky for green, for Auren. So if you see you can get on temp shipping and snag G3 before them, then that really helps. And then the one other thing that I would look for is this, how feasible is this northern town area? In particular, B5 tends to get really threatened. Darklings and alchemists often want that hex so they can connect through the north. Giants, this will often be one of their earliest stomps, and that kills the possibility of that north town. So I think that's another thing to look out for, is how can I get here fast enough to secure these hexes to town there. And so I think, can you see that those 1, 2, 3, hopefully 2, 3 towns. If the last thing that I would just always look for is if you can start on F4 and dig E7, D5, C3, if you can get those 2 hexes and then to the free, that's insanely good. So that would be a big positive for Auren. The spiciest way to play Auren, in my opinion, is to do some of those openings I was mentioning in the earlier section, the opening section, where you're getting to the 8th step of a cult reward round 1. Those games are really wild. It feels a little crazy because you're not prioritizing expansion as early as maybe you would think, but those games are really, those are a wild ride. So definitely give that a think, and it's in how you're using your 2 steps from your stronghold, the favor you take, maybe your step, have a priest, or starting on the 4 coins and a cult step scroll. Those are all, you can just combine them in different ways to try to hit cult rewards. Definitely give yourself the bucket list item of sweeping the cults, and also Tall Auren, trying to play Auren with only 7 or 8 structures on the board. Shout out Sprockets. Have fun. Auren can be a fun ride.